Why are we here? It's a question that many people have asked through the years, but in the context of video games, it's a little bit more literal. We move from point A to point B, we compare objectives, and unlike in real life, we have a clearly defined goal, a thing that by design we are trying to achieve. But what about the moments between point A and point B? What is the purpose of a space that wants nothing from you, that asks nothing of you? A space with no enemies to fight and no resources to gather? A space that's just there? In visual art, negative space is the name given to an empty area around a subject. It's a deliberate use of nothing to give shape and meaning to something. In games, negative space can guide the player's eye to a point of interest, or set the mood, or simply give a player time to breathe between moments of action. The opposite is a world of pure, suffocating density, where everywhere you look, there's a story or an objective. Such worlds are often heavy in environmental storytelling, where the game world isn't just a setting for a narrative, it is part of the narrative. In some cases, it is the narrative. The impact that nothing can have on the human psyche is evident in many places. Right now, for better or worse, the focal point of this video is my voice, because there's nothing else going on. Carl Sagan famously used the immensity of space to highlight how utterly insignificant we are as a species against the backdrop of the universe, in the pale blue dot quote. "Look again at that dot," he said. "That's here. That's home. That's us. On it, everyone you love, everyone who ever was, lived out their lives on a mote of dust suspended in a sunbeam." This was a powerful image, and these were powerful words. But they weren't powerful because of the tiny smudge of light that represents everything we've ever known as a species. They were powerful because of the vast empty void that took up the other 99.9% of the image. In contrast, the blue marble is a spectacular shot of our planet, an achingly beautiful ball of life that occupies most of the image. These two pictures depict the same subject, but they evoke very different feelings. Negative space is used everywhere, from architecture to filmmaking to the script that I'm reading right now. But negative space is not easy, and rarely is it free. In print media, too much white space is seen as a waste of expensive paper. In increasingly densely populated cities, negative space can be a hard sell when you could fit another apartment building or shopping centre there. Video games are no different. Developers are very often scared of negative space, and understandably, done wrong, it can feel less of an intentional choice and more just unfinished, lazy even. The temptation then is to fill these spaces with quests and interactive elements to justify the real estate, but in doing so, they cease to become negative space. The pale blue dot would have been a very different picture with a brilliant starfield in the background. There's also the same financial utility I touched on. Every aspect of a game's world has a financial cost to it. Someone has to design it, create assets for it, and implement it into the game. From a purely business perspective, the return on investment for negative space in video games can be a hard sell. Why spend loads of money making a large empty area when you could shove in another boss or quest, or even cut it out completely and save money? Fortunately, games are an art form, not a checklist. Even developers at soulless corporate AAA studios can occasionally inflict their artistic will on a project. At this point, I think it's important to clarify something. Big open-world games like Skyrim and GTA, they have areas that serve no utility as far as gameplay is concerned. You could play through the entirety of Cyberpunk 2077 and never see substantial parts of the map. Well, unless you're Annie Austin. But that's not negative space, since you don't have to go there. Negative space is unavoidable. Like, imagine reading a letter. Your eyes have to traverse the white space between paragraphs to read the whole thing. On the other hand, you can look at the blank space at the bottom of the page, or turn it over and look at the blank part at the back, but it's not a requirement. You don't have to go there, and there is no impotence to do so. The use of negative space, or not, in video games is perfectly expressed in two of, in my opinion, the greatest narrative games of the last decade. The Vanishing of Ethan Carter takes place in a sprawling, beautiful, but achingly empty valley. Narrative beats and points of interest are separated by vast swaths of nature that, while very pretty, are completely devoid of anything to interact with. They are transitory spaces that you must pass through to get to the next story beat, but they offer nothing for you to do. In contrast, What Remains of Edith Finch is set in a claustrophobic, impossibly cluttered Tim Burton-esque house, where everywhere you look you see an intentional detail. You climb through the hodgepodge assortment of tacked-on rooms, never more than a hallway's length from the next story beat. Ever since I first played these games that on paper are functionally identical, it struck me how different they felt. And while there are obvious things to point to, like setting, art style, writing, I think the use of negative space is the most fundamental difference between them. The Vanishing of Ethan Carter drops you into the game at the mouth of a train tunnel. A single track cuts through the autumnal forest in front of you, and the game proudly declares that it will not hold your hand. You're on your own. With nothing else to do, you just start walking. The world of Ethan Carter is stunning. Obviously it's less impressive by today's standards, this is an 11-year-old game after all, but even now it's pretty damn pretty. The developers were pioneers in using photogrammetry in video games, a technique that involves stitching together thousands of real-world photos to create a 3D object. And the result is not only a world that looks real, but one that feels real. And I don't mean real in the sense that it looks realistic, I mean real in the sense that it doesn't feel created. It feels less like the developers conceived and created Red Creek and more like they discovered it and then constructed a story inside of it. Which I guess technically speaking they did, because they used real locations, but it was conveyed, is what I'm saying. They conveyed it. Beyond the detailed textures and authentic geometry of the world, the space is what drives the sense of realism. Video games typically try to give you the impression of scale while keeping everything small and compact. Technical limitations play a role, but imagine if Ezio had to traverse an authentically scaled Florence to get to his next objective. From a gamer's perspective, realism can be pretty boring. Far from shying away from this, The Vanishing of Ethan Carter leans into it. Anything of interest is separated by long, ponderous walks along a train track, across a bridge, through a forest. There's nothing to interact with, nobody to talk to. You are alone with your thoughts. This is the negative space of Ethan Carter. When I first played the game, my gut reaction was one of annoyance. I felt like the developers were forcing me to spend most of my time walking around this beautiful but pointless valley out of pride. They'd made a stunning world, and they wanted to make sure I noticed. But on my second playthrough, I started to appreciate the impact of all of this space. One of the many films that burned a lasting impression into my brain was the 1995 miniseries based on the Stephen King novella The Langoliers. In it, a plane full of people finds themselves on the wrong side of time. In the world of the Langoliers, time is a constant moment, like a moving train. If you find yourself ahead of the train, you can simply wait for it to catch up and sweep you away with the present. Just enjoy the vibrance of a world waiting to exist, everything fresh, everything new. But if you find yourself behind the train, they land in an empty airport. The air feels stale. There are no birds chirping, no vehicles moving. Everything is just there. They try the food, but it has no taste. They try to light a match, but it won't ignite. The world is there. Not dead, but not alive either. The whole environment is one big pregnant pause. Regardless of how you feel about the Langoliers themselves, and a lot of people had opinions about that, the level of suspense that was built up by the time that we finally meet the eponymous monster is immense. The characters in the movie know something is coming, even though they've never seen it and don't know what it is. The Langoliers was generally seen as disappointing, and critics, as critics tend to do, had no shortage of reasons for why it was disappointing. But it's my unprofessional opinion that it suffered from its own success. The tension, apprehension, and sense of dread build unstoppably for 2 hours. By the time the monsters arrive, they can't possibly live up to the hype. Certainly not with mid-90s TV movie CGI. But the reason that suspense worked, long before the monsters ever showed up, was the setting. The empty airport, the stale air, that's the uncanny valley of location. And it's a subtle wrongness that makes your brain recoil. The photogrammetry technique used in Ethan Carter results in a world that looks too real to be a game, but too empty to be real, too static. And the game makes you exist there, immersed in that wrongness, for the entirety of the playthrough. In contrast to the large, empty valley of Red Creek, What Remains of Edith Finch puts you in a teetering, claustrophobic house that has more in common with a warren than a meadow. Each room is relatively small and full of stuff. It makes it almost impossible to point the player in any direction and not see something of interest. It's a theme park house created specifically for this experience. Every room stands as a silent monument to a life that has ended. A discarded wheelchair and oxygen tanks, a collection of comic books, a movie poster, a jumble of clues that tell you about the person who lived there, even before you hear their part of the story. The house is more than a setting, it's a character. It's a physical manifestation of the family's history and the supposed curse that's been picking them off for years. Just as Ethan Carter uses copious amounts of negative space to force the player to sit with their thoughts, Edith Finch denies the player that same space, giving you barely a moment to process the things you've just witnessed. Like the protagonist of Ethan Carter, and the passengers in the Langoliers, Edith finds herself exploring a dusty, dead world. A house of memories, echoes of things of the past. But unlike those worlds, we're seeing them through an engaged lens. Edith remembers her family with a mixture of emotions: fondness, regret, guilt. She isn't an outside observer. Her perspective is shifting constantly, coloured by her experiences, and the claustrophobic, tangled house reflects that, and puts the player right in the middle of it. Each story the player encounters is markedly different. The game takes you from cel-shaded comic books to stylized kingdoms to squeaky toys in a bathtub. The constant stream of information being thrown at you is made all the more overwhelming by the diversity of its content. You never get the chance to settle into the game. Despite the nature of Edith Finch, a game about several people dying in many unpleasant ways, the game does not have the sense of foreboding that Ethan Carter does. You don't feel like there's a monster, metaphorical or otherwise, waiting for you in the last room. There's no Langoliers on the horizon. Edith Finch is a feat of technical curation. Every asset had to be made with intent and placed in the world. Unlike Ethan Carter, where large parts of the world are real physical locations, everything that exists in Edith Finch was consciously put there by a developer. As a result, the game is constantly holding your hand, practically grabbing your chubby cheeks and forcing you to look at the next thing. The lack of negative space is a deliberate assault on the player's senses. You're not here to think, you can do that on your own time. The comparison between Edith and Ethan is not just about games being similar on paper but different in execution. You didn't need a 15-minute video to know that an idea can be realized in different ways. The design of Edith Finch mimics the fugue state that people often find themselves in the immediate aftermath of a loved one's passing. Wandering through life handling the bland admin of death, being silently bombarded by a torrent of emotion and memories that break against you like tides on a seawall. The dense, oppressive, handcrafted clutter of the Finch house is that flood, and you, the player, wander through it, connected to the memories but detached. If the player had a moment of neutral negative space to stop and breathe, they might actually process the tragedy of the last vignette. But the house doesn't let them. The next cluttered room, the next story is always right there, pulling you forward. There is no in-between. Ethan Carter, on the other hand, is built on guilt and dread. You are ostensibly there to find out what happened to a missing child, but at no point does the game give you any reason to suspect you will find anything other than a corpse. The design of the game forces introspection. The game world is hauntingly real but empty, and the player is abandoned in it. Here you get nothing but negative space. You have no choice but to be alone with your thoughts, and that alone time, immersed in the wrongness of the game world, is precisely where the Langoliers live.
You're out there, aren't you?
In these games, negative space is not just a tool used to help achieve a certain vibe. It is a fundamental building block, a core pillar in the game's creation. Thank you for watching. If you like this video, please take a moment to hit the like button, subscribe, leave a comment. All of these things are free and really help the channel a lot. And as always, a huge thanks to all the patrons, members, Twitch subs and Nitro boosters. These videos wouldn't be possible without you guys. I'll see you next time.